Joining me now is Republican Congressman Mo Brooks, who represents Alabama's 5th District. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to get your kind of reaction to this ongoing kind of negotiation with the Taliban. Of course, there was that peace deal that was signed. However, there are some stipulations to determine what really comes next. So today we saw troops kind of start being withdrawn from Afghanistan. What do you make of this progress so far?
Well, it reminds me to a large degree of the Paris Accords that were supposed to end the war in Vietnam. Of course, we saw what happened. Once the American troops were pulled out, the South Vietnamese were not willing to fight for their freedom, for their liberty, and instead they were overrun by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. I anticipate that when America ultimately leaves Afghanistan, given the nature of their belief system in that country, that you'll see the kind of discord that we saw in Vietnam when we left. And it will take some struggle before the warring sides decide who's going to be in control of what parts of the country. To me, that's going to be the inevitable end game.
And you're on the Armed Services Committee, so you probably know this topic better than most people that we talk to when it comes to this subject. What is the U.S. role in that? Is the U.S., should they be more active in that, kind of making sure that, for example, the Taliban is kind of following through on their end? Or is that more the job of the Afghanistan government in this process?
If the Afghan people want liberty and freedom, if they want to have a republic, then by golly, they have to fight for it. The United States of America, we've been sacrificing American lives and American treasury now for 5 times longer than it took us to win World War II. That ought to say something. To me, this is an endless war. It's going to last indefinitely if our ultimate goal is everybody's going to go kumbaya and say peace. You've got significant differences of opinion amongst the Afghan people as to where they want to go. Certainly fundamentalist Islam is part of the problem, and that it tends to incite the kind of violence that we've seen by al-Qaeda, by the Islamic State, by the Taliban, and by others. And we have to accept that they have a different ideology, a different belief system in Afghanistan than we have in the United States of America, or that they had in Germany, Italy, and Japan, countries that after World War II were able to adjust, to change, and become republics and long-term allies of the United States. I simply don't see, with the Islamic fundamentalism that rules in Afghanistan, Afghan going the direction of Japan, Germany, or Italy as it did after our occupation after World War II and the Marshall Plan.
And you know, polls show that the American people are very on board with what you're saying right now. I mean, being in Afghanistan, being in Iraq right now are not popular topics among American voters. In fact, that kind of goes in line with this more populist type of movement that's taking place not only all around the world, but especially here in the U.S. right now. And acknowledging the fact that we spend trillions of dollars on those wars right now, would you like to see maybe some of those funds go to maybe other domestic programs, or maybe the resources kind of go to other things in kind of securing our borders or something here in the U.S.?
I would love for those resources to go to secure our border. I also think that as a high priority, we have to decrease our deficit that threatens America with a national insolvency and bankruptcy that would wreak havoc with our economy, and for that matter would take any number of American lives when all of a sudden there's an abrupt adverse effect of going into a depression because of an insolvent central government. But the bottom line is, we can't afford to be the world's policeman on every corner of the planet. If we're going to engage in multinational efforts, that's one thing. But if we're going to be the primary burden in these countries, if we're going to be the ones sacrificing almost solely, almost exclusively ourselves, that's wrong. If the rest of the world's not willing to get in it with us, then we should not be willing to get in it on behalf of the rest of the world.
And you talk about the cost right now, and that comes at a time where a lot of Democratic presidential candidates are coming out with very expansive, very expensive programs such as Medicare for All. We heard Bernie Sanders at his town hall on Fox News last night say that he would not close the borders amid the coronavirus outbreak. Is that something that you think that you take issue with, rather? And do you think that this outbreak is kind of making the case a little bit for why there needs to be stricter immigration controls?
No, the time for the closing of the borders is long past. That would have been 2 or 3 months ago. At this point, it is impossible to stop the coronavirus, COVID-19, which is a particular strain of coronavirus, from getting into every part of the United States of America. There are thousands of people at this point in time who probably have COVID-19, many of whom have been tested and confirmed that way, and many of whom have not been tested but nonetheless have it. So the genie's out of the bottle. The Pandora's box has been opened. Now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of us having had open borders that allowed people with the coronavirus to come into our country. A greater concern is whether other countries, because of how bad the situation is in America, whether other countries are going to close their borders to American citizens because so many of us, thousands of us now, have COVID-19.
No, I think that's an interesting thing to bring up. I mean, that's what we've done to China. We hear that Italy is even, we're trying to think about doing the same thing to Italy as it breaks out there as well. It's interesting to see if that'll be flipped on us if it breaks out here even more. But Congressman Mo Brooks, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, it is going to break out more.
It will break out more. You're right about that. It is going to spread. It's a matter of containment efforts, I think, at this point, too, and whether or not how much we can address it. Do you think that I'm right to say that?
We can slow it down, but we cannot stop it. It's a highly contagious disease. What we have to do is make sure that our healthcare system is adequately prepared to be able to handle the number of people who have COVID-19. And if we're able to do that, well, then our fatality rate will be far less than what it is in many other parts of the planet. I'm confident that this is not as bad as the mainstream news media, the Democrats, want it to seem to be. Unfortunately, I believe that they're, for partisan reasons, trying to create a panic in hopes that it will help them with the November 2020 elections. That's shameful on their part, but that's not to say it's not serious. It is serious, but if we do the right thing, we'll come through this fine, just as we have with any other number of contagions in the past, like SARS or MERS or swine flu or what have you.
No, I think you're exactly right. It's going to be a test on our healthcare system, which is one of the best in the world. So I think with what you're saying right now, that is going to be the true test of whether or not it compares to other places around the world. But Congressman, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.